The road to Hallow House stretched ahead like a broken thread of asphalt, winding its way through the forest. Gnarled, skeletal trees lined either side, their claw-like branches arching over the van as if trying to ensnare us. The silence of the woods was unnerving, broken only by the occasional rustle of something unseen. Even the wind seemed hesitant to penetrate this place, its distant howls dying before they reached us. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, my flashlight gripped tightly in my lap. My fingers tapped a restless rhythm against its cold casing, a futile attempt to mask the tension clawing at my chest. "Lovely spot for a vacation," I muttered, my sarcasm thinly veiling the unease creeping through me. Jackson, ever the thrill-seeker, smirked without taking his eyes off the road. "Admit it, Clara, this is way better than grading psych papers." "I'd rather face a room full of plagiarists," I shot back, though my voice betrayed my discomfort. I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Mira in the back seat. She was unsettlingly calm, her hands clasped around a string of black beads as her lips moved in a silent prayer, or maybe a spell. "We're close," Jackson said, his bravado slipping as the dashboard equipment began to flicker erratically. The green light from the monitor painted his face in an eerie hue, making his confidence look as fragile as I felt. I turned to the window, regretting it instantly. The trees outside seemed to twist and warp, their shadows reaching out like tendrils. The van jolted violently over a pothole, pulling me back to reality. "Are you sure we're even on a road anymore?" I asked, my skepticism laced with irritation. Mira's voice, low and detached, broke the tension. "We're on the right path. It's leading us there." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "It?" I turned in my seat to face her. "You mean the house?" She met my gaze, her dark eyes unnervingly steady. "The house doesn't wait for you, it calls you." Her cryptic words settled heavily in the van, and for once I didn't have a sharp retort. When the Hallow House finally emerged from the darkness, it felt as though the trees themselves had spat it out. The mansion loomed before us like a carcass of grandeur, its spires and turrets jabbing at the night sky. Ivy strangled its decaying walls as if trying to lock something inside. The windows stared back at us, dark and hollow, like the empty sockets of a skull. "Hell of a fixer-upper," Jackson quipped, though his tone lacked its usual swagger. I stepped out of the van, the cold air biting at my skin. My boots crunched loudly on the gravel, the sound jarring in the oppressive silence. A faint whisper carried on the wind, so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. "What is it?" Jackson asked, already adjusting his camera. The lens gleamed in the dim moonlight as he readied it. "Nothing," I lied, shaking my head. "Just the wind." Mira joined us, her beads and a small leather notebook in hand. As she stepped onto the gravel, the whispers faded, as if the house was holding its breath. We stood together, staring at the massive front doors, their intricate carvings worn to near obscurity by time. "You ready?" Jackson asked. "No," I said flatly. My gaze shifted to Mira, who was studying the house with unsettling intensity. "What's your read on this place?" "It's old," she murmured, her voice distant. "Hungry?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to scoff. "Great, a haunted house with a superiority complex." We climbed the cracked steps together. The door was massive, its brass handle tarnished and worn. Jackson's EMF meter spiked wildly, its needle jumping to the red before we even touched the door. "It's been waiting a long time," Mira said, brushing her fingers against the wood. Jackson looked at me, his grin faltering. "You want to do the honors?" I hesitated but shook it off. "Fine, but if something jumps out at me, I'm punching it." With a deep breath, I gripped the handle and shoved. The door groaned open, revealing a yawning darkness that seemed to devour the light of our flashlights. A wave of cold air rushed out, carrying with it the stench of mildew and decay. As we stepped inside, the door creaked shut behind us, the sound reverberating through the stillness like a final verdict. And then, the house waited. The door slammed shut behind us with a resounding bang, the kind of sound that sends a jolt straight to your core. I flinched, spinning around to face the sealed entrance. Instinctively, my hand reached for the doorknob, but the moment my fingers brushed it, I froze. It was ice cold, far too cold. I yanked on it once, twice, but it didn't budge. "Great," I muttered, stepping back with a scowl. Locked in already, classic horror setup. Jackson sidled up beside me, adjusting the strap of his gear bag. His flashlight flickered as it cut through the gloom, revealing a massive, shadow-filled foyer that seemed to stretch forever. "No going back now," he said, trying for a casual tone, but I could hear the tension beneath it. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The foyer was wrong. The ceiling soared into darkness, too high to make sense. The walls were lined with tall, gilded mirrors, their warped surfaces twisting our flashlight beams into something grotesque. The wood-paneled floor creaked beneath our feet, its patterns curling and warped like old parchment left to rot. Chandeliers hung above us, their crystals wrapped in cobwebs that swayed unnervingly in an unseen breeze. Mira moved forward, her flashlight pointed low. Its beam skimmed the floor, revealing scuff marks and dark stains embedded in the wood grain. Stains that looked too dark, too deliberate, to be anything ordinary. She stopped in front of one of the mirrors, staring into the fractured glass. Her lips moved silently, a prayer or incantation I couldn't quite hear. "These mirrors," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the oppressive silence. "They're wrong." I folded my arms, rolling my eyes despite the chill that crept up my spine. It's a house full of antiques. Of course, they're a little off. Everything here's practically falling apart. Mira turned her head slowly, meeting my gaze with a look that made my stomach twist. "No," she said, her voice steady but low. "It's not age, they're watching us." I opened my mouth to argue, but Jackson cut me off. He raised his camera, pointing it at one of the mirrors. "Hold on," he said, squinting at the screen. "I think I'm picking up movement." My heart stopped for just a second as we all turned to look. The mirror reflected the room back at us, but wrong, distorted, like looking through rippling water. And then I saw it, a shadowy figure, faint but human-shaped, standing just behind me. I spun around, my flashlight slicing through the air, but the space behind me was empty. "What the—" I began, but Jackson's voice cut through. "Wait," he said sharply, his eyes glued to the camera screen. "It's still there." I turned back to the mirror. The figure remained, faint but unmistakable. A child, or something shaped like one. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its hollow, blackened eyes fixed on us. My chest tightened as a cold dread crept over me. "Do you see that?" Jackson whispered, a mix of awe and fear in his voice. "I see it," Mira murmured, clutching her beads tightly as her lips began moving again in that soft, frantic rhythm. I forced myself to speak. "It's a trick," I said, though even I could hear the tremor in my voice. "Something in the glass, or your equipment glitching. It's nothing." Jackson didn't answer. His camera flickered, static crawling across the screen. The figure in the mirror moved, a single step forward. I felt a cold jolt rush through me. "All right," I snapped, stepping back. "We're not here to gawk at haunted antiques. Let's move on." Mira tore her gaze from the mirror, her face pale. "You're not listening," she said, her voice sharper than usual. "This isn't just a house. It knows we're here. It's already started." Before I could argue, a deep creak echoed from somewhere deeper in the house, followed by a faint, unmistakable whisper. I gripped my flashlight tighter. "Tell me that was the wind." "It wasn't," Jackson said grimly, pulling out his EMF detector. The needle jumped erratically, spiking from green to red. "This place is alive. We've got activity." Mira backed toward the door, her beads trembling in her hand. "We shouldn't have come," she whispered. "It's awake now." The air around us grew heavy, pressing down like the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stand straight. "We're here to investigate," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "So, let's do it." Jackson nodded, though his gaze lingered on the mirror. "All right," he said, adjusting his gear. "But no splitting up. We stick together." "Wasn't planning on it," I muttered, glancing nervously at the mirrors lining the hallway. As we moved deeper into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that our reflections were lagging behind us, watching us with eyes that weren't ours. The house was alive, and it was waiting. The air grew colder as we moved deeper into the house. Each step felt heavier, muffled by the thick layer of dust coating the warped wooden floor. That faint mildew scent we'd grown used to gave way to something sharper, a metallic tang that churned my stomach. My flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering, and I muttered a curse under my breath, giving it a quick shake. Ahead of us loomed a door at the end of the corridor, its brass handle tarnished and etched with patterns long eroded by time. "This looks inviting," Jackson muttered. His attempt at humor fell flat as his hand hesitated on the doorknob. With a slow creak, he pushed the door open. The parlor beyond was massive. Too massive. The transition from the narrow hallway to this vast, suffocating space felt wrong, like stepping into another reality. My flashlight swept across the room, revealing a grotesque monument to decay. The ceiling soared into darkness, its edges lost in shadow. Above us, a grand chandelier hung precariously, its crystal strands draped with cobwebs that swayed in an unseen breeze. The light from my flashlight seemed to twist unnaturally, pooling in strange corners and leaving patches of impenetrable black. My eyes caught glimpses of faded floral wallpaper peeling away from the walls, exposing jagged cracks in the plaster beneath. A once beautiful Persian rug sprawled across the center of the room, its patterns marred by dark, ominous stains. At the heart of the parlor stood a grand piano. It was the kind of centerpiece that would have exuded elegance in its prime, but now its black lacquered surface was dulled with age and dust. The keys lay exposed, some chipped and yellowed, others streaked with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. "Looks like someone was hosting the world's creepiest recital," I said, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Jackson didn't reply. He was already pulling out his equipment, his camera aimed directly at the piano. The EMF detector in his hand spiked erratically, emitting a high-pitched whine. "This room is hot," he said, eyes glued to his tablet. "Temperature fluctuations are all over the place, and the electromagnetic field is insane. This is perfect." Mira hadn't moved. She stood just inside the doorway, clutching her beads so tightly her knuckles were white. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This room, it's wrong." I sighed, my frustration bubbling over. "The whole house is wrong, Mira. You're going to have to be more specific." Before she could respond, a single, haunting note rang out from the piano. It was faint, hesitant, but it cut through the stillness like a blade. My breath hitched as I swung my flashlight toward the instrument. its beam shaking with my unsteady hand. "No way," Jackson whispered. His camera was fixed on the piano. "Tell me someone saw that." "Nobody saw anything because it's probably just the house settling," I snapped, though the words sounded hollow even to me. A second note followed, louder and deeper, and this time the keys moved. My throat tightened. The melody was broken, halting, as though the pianist was struggling to remember the tune. The air in the room grew denser, pressing down on me with every eerie note. "This isn't possible," I whispered, unable to look away. "It's not just possible," Jackson said, edging closer with his camera. "It's happening." The piano lid slammed shut with a thunderous crash, the sound reverberating through the room and shaking the chandelier above. I jumped, my flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the room shifted. The walls rippled, the floral patterns twisting and warping like they were alive. The chandelier swung violently, its cobwebbed crystals clinking together in a chaotic rhythm. The piano groaned, its surface splitting to reveal jagged cracks oozing a thick black liquid. "Jackson, what the hell is happening?" I demanded, scrambling to grab my flashlight. "The readings are—" His voice cut off as his tablet screen turned to static. A piercing shriek erupted from the device before it shut off completely. I don't know, this is insane." Mira stepped back, her voice sharp and urgent. "We have to leave, now." I turned to argue, but the house seemed to react to her words. The black liquid from the piano began spreading across the floor, creeping toward us like sentient tendrils. The walls groaned louder, frost forming along the shattered windows. "We're not running," I said, trying to sound firm, though my fear was cracking through. "We came here to investigate, and that's—" My words died as the piano lid creaked open again. There were no strings inside, no hammers, just rows of jagged, yellowed teeth, glistening and wet. The piano seemed to breathe, its horrific maw expanding and contracting like a living thing. "That's it," Jackson said, backing away. "I'm with Mira. We need to go." The black liquid touched my boot, sending a sharp, icy pain up my leg. I stumbled back, gasping. "Fine, let's go." We turned toward the doorway, only it wasn't there anymore. The entry had vanished, replaced by a solid wall, its wallpaper seeping with the same dark liquid. My heart raced as the realization hit. We were trapped. "There's no way out," Mira whispered, clutching her beads tighter. "It's keeping us here." The piano slammed shut again, the force shaking the floor beneath us. The room was alive, its every movement a threat, and I knew we were running out of time. The world around me dissolved, the parlor vanishing like smoke. 1 second, I was stumbling back from the grotesque maw of the piano, and the next, the walls seemed to exhale, rippling outward before splitting into jagged shards. My vision blurred, and the floor beneath me disappeared, replaced by a swirling void of shadows and fleeting, distorted images. I felt like I was falling into nothingness. When my senses returned, I was alone. I stood in a hallway that shouldn't exist, its dimensions warped and oppressive, like it was pressing in on me. The walls were lined with mirrors, tall, ornate things that stretched unnaturally toward the ceiling. The flickering light of a chandelier swayed above me, its golden chains groaning under some invisible weight. "Jackson?" I called, my voice trembling. "Mira." The only response was my voice echoing back to me, distorted and wrong. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move forward, each step hesitant, the floor creaking under my boots. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment I saw it. A shadow in one of the mirrors. A small child running ahead. My chest tightened. "Michael?" I whispered, the name slipping from my lips before I could stop it. The shadow stopped, hovering at the edge of my vision. A boy, just an outline, his back to me. My heart pounded as memories I had buried clawed their way to the surface. I took a shaky step toward the mirror, my hand trembling as I reached out. "Michael!" I shouted, my voice breaking. The second my fingers brushed the glass, it rippled like water. The boy turned slightly, his face hidden in the darkness. Then, with a deafening crack, the mirror shattered, raining shards all around me. Each fragment caught something horrifying. My face, twisted with fear. The boy, his features grotesque, and the hallway, its walls closing in. The world shifted again. I was standing in my childhood living room, and I knew it instantly. The threadbare sofa, the mismatched curtains, the faint scent of lavender cleaner, it was all the same. But the light was wrong. Dim, sickly, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe. "Michael," I called, my voice cracking under the weight of the memory. A soft giggle echoed from the kitchen. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was familiar, melodic and innocent, but it sent a chill down my spine. I forced my feet to move, stepping toward the sound. The kitchen door was ajar, and an unnaturally bright light spilled through the crack, blinding me. I pushed the door open, and there he was. Michael sat at the table, just as I remembered him. His dark curls fell into his eyes as he hunched over a plate of cookies. He looked up at me and smiled, a wide, toothy grin that felt wrong. My chest ached as I whispered, "Michael, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't." His smile faltered, twisting into something cruel. "You let me drown," he said, his voice cutting through me like a blade. I stumbled back. "No," I choked out, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I tried to save you. You didn't try hard enough," he snarled, his voice deepening, distorting. His eyes turned black, hollow voids that seemed to swallow the light. The walls groaned and twisted as shadows poured from every corner of the room. Michael's body stretched unnaturally, his limbs elongating until they scraped the ceiling. "You left me!" he screamed, his voice shattering into 1,000 echoes. His form collapsed into a mass of writhing shadows that surged toward me. I ran. Elsewhere, Jackson wasn't doing any better. He was trapped in a maze of flickering screens and writhing cables. The monitors displayed distorted images of his childhood apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the flickering light. On one screen, his father appeared, sitting in that tattered armchair with a beer in one hand and a belt in the other. "Boy," the figure barked, its voice crackling through static, "come here." Jackson froze, clutching his camera like a lifeline. "You're not real," he whispered. "You can't hurt me anymore." The figure turned toward him, its face obscured by static. "You think you've escaped me," it growled. The monitors shattered, and the cables came alive, wrapping around his arms and legs, dragging him into the shadows. Mira was engulfed in darkness, oppressive and absolute. Whispers surrounded her, dozens of mocking, accusatory voices speaking in a language she didn't understand. She clutched her beads, her lips moving in desperate prayer, but the voices only grew louder. A single light flickered on, revealing a woman in the distance. Her back was turned, her hair long and dark. Mira's heart stopped. "Mom?" she whispered. The woman didn't respond, but Mira stepped forward, the light following her. "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" The woman turned, her face twisted in rage and sorrow. "You let me die," she hissed. "No," Mira cried. "I tried to save you. I did everything I could." The woman's face contorted into something monstrous, her mouth stretching wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "You let me die," she screamed, lunging at Mira. The house wasn't just trapping us, it was breaking us, forcing us to confront our darkest memories and deepest regrets. No matter how hard we ran, the walls shifted, the floors splintered, and the shadows closed in. The Hallow House wasn't finished with us. It was feeding on our fear, and it was only just beginning. The moment the parlor dissolved, I was swallowed by darkness, icy, suffocating and absolute. My boots slipped on the uneven, damp ground, and I stumbled forward, the faint, rhythmic drip of water echoing somewhere ahead. My flashlight sputtered, its weak beam trembling before dying altogether, leaving me in near total blackness. My fingers tightened around my beads, the smooth stones cool against my skin, trembling as I clung to them. Mira. The whisper cut through the void, soft and familiar, almost seductive. I froze. That voice, I knew that voice. It clawed at my chest, pulling memories I had buried deep to the surface. My breath hitched as I forced myself to speak. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound steady despite the fear flooding my veins. The air shifted, heavy and suffocating. A pale light flickered ahead, casting just enough glow to reveal a narrow corridor. My footsteps echoed as I approached the shelves that lined the walls. Glass jars filled every inch of space, their murky surfaces glistening with condensation. Each jar pulsed faintly, their contents swirling with organic shapes that seemed to move of their own accord. I stopped in front of one jar, my eyes drawn to its warped, discolored glass. Inside, the faint glow revealed a face. A woman's face contorted in silent agony. My breath caught, the beads slipping slightly in my grip as the realization struck me. "Mom," I whispered, my voice breaking. The face shifted, turning to meet my gaze, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. The glow intensified and the glass cracked, fractures spreading like veins. I stumbled back, clutching the beads tighter as the jar shattered. Black liquid spilled out, pooling on the floor and writhing like living shadows. "Mira!" The voice came again, louder now, echoing from every direction. "You left me." "No," I choked, shaking my head as tears blurred my vision. "I didn't leave you. I tried to save you." The shadows rose, forming a twisted silhouette. My mother stood before me, her features distorted and wrong. Her eyes burned with an unnatural light, and her hands stretched into claws that scraped the floor as she advanced. "You failed me," she hissed, her voice thick with pain and rage. "You let them take me." The weight of her accusation brought me to my knees. I gripped the beads so tightly they bit into my palms. "I didn't want to leave," I sobbed. "I begged them to let me stay." "Lies!" she screamed, each step leaving dark, bleeding stains on the floor. The walls around us twisted, the jars shattering one by one. The hallway melted away, replaced by a space I knew all too well. I was in our apartment. The peeling wallpaper, the threadbare couch, the faint wheeze of the oxygen tank. I knew every detail, down to the stale smell of unwashed dishes in the sink. I saw myself, younger and desperate, crouched beside my mother as she lay on the couch, frail and pale. Her breaths were shallow, her eyes sunken. The memory hit like a physical blow. "I didn't want to leave," I whispered, watching my younger self sob as I clutched a small suitcase. A man in a dark suit stood by the door, his face obscured. "If you don't come now, you'll lose your chance," he said, cold and emotionless. Younger me turned back one last time, tears streaming down my face. "I'll come back for you," I promised. "I swear." The promise echoed in the silence, dragging me back to the present. My mother's twisted form towered over me, her eyes blazing with accusation. "You never came back," she hissed. "I couldn't," I screamed, my voice raw. "They wouldn't let me. I was a child. I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice." Her voice layered with countless others, all angry, mournful, mocking. Her form unraveled, twisting into a monstrous shape. Limbs stretched unnaturally, her face splitting into a grotesque grin filled with jagged teeth. "You abandoned me." I scrambled back, my chest heaving. The jars shattered around me, black liquid spilling out like vines climbing the walls. Shadows closed in, and faces emerged, faces of people I had failed, spirits I couldn't save. They stared at me with hollow eyes, their mouths forming silent screams. "Stop!" I cried, covering my ears as the voices rose into a deafening roar. "I did everything I could. I didn't mean to." And then silence. I opened my eyes, my chest heaving. The jars were gone, the shadows had retreated, and the hallway was empty. I was alone again. But their presence lingered, just beyond the edges of the light. I knew the Hallow House wasn't done with me, and deep down, I knew it never would be. The walls twisted and groaned around me, bending in ways that defied reason. It wasn't just a house. It was alive, breathing, flexing, and intent on swallowing me whole. I stumbled into a vast room that shouldn't exist. My flashlight flickered weakly, as though the very light was afraid to shine here. I had no idea how I'd ended up in this space. One moment, I was running from the shadow of my brother, and the next, I was yanked into this impossible chamber. The room was cavernous, its edges lost in darkness. The floor was a fractured mosaic of broken mirrors, each shard reflecting distorted fragments of my face and surroundings. The walls pulsated faintly, coursing with veins of crimson light that looked disturbingly alive. Above me, the ceiling stretched into a starless void, an abyss that seemed to devour everything. "Jackson?" I called out, my voice shaky, swallowed by the oppressive silence. "Mira?" The crunch of glass under my boots echoed eerily as I took a hesitant step forward. The beam of my flashlight caught a figure in the distance. Relief and dread fought within me as I recognized the silhouette. It was Jackson. He stood with his back to me, his head tilted slightly, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. "Jackson!" I called again, louder this time, my steps quickening despite the shards cutting into my boots. "What are you?" I stopped short, my breath catching in my throat. Jackson wasn't alone. Standing in front of him was Alex, our team leader, the one who was supposed to be outside, safely monitoring from the van. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. Something about him was wrong, though. His usual warmth was gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness that made my skin crawl. "Alex?" My voice trembled as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "What are you doing here?" Alex turned toward me, his movements unnaturally fluid. His face was pale, waxy, and his eyes glowed faintly with a cold, otherworldly light. When he smiled, it was predatory, sharp, and knowing. "Clara," he said, his voice layered with an unnatural echo, "you've done well to make it this far." A chill ran through me. "What are you talking about? You were supposed to be outside. How did you get in here?" He chuckled, the sound low and resonant, vibrating through the room. "Oh, I've always been here." I stepped back instinctively, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. Jackson turned toward me, his face slack and his eyes glassy. "He's part of it," Jackson said, his voice hollow. "The house. He's the house." My stomach dropped. "What?" I stammered, shaking my head. "That's not possible, Alex." "Alex was never real," he interrupted, his tone almost mocking. "You've been chasing shadows, all of you. Did you really think you were investigating the Hallow House?" He spread his arms, his glowing eyes locking onto mine. "I am the house. I've been guiding you, feeding on your fears and pain, and you've been such a delightful feast." The room shifted violently as if in response. The veins in the walls pulsed brighter, flooding the space with a sickly red glow. The shards of mirror on the floor slid together, forming grotesque mosaics, scenes from our lives. My chest tightened as I saw Michael's face in one, his hollow eyes accusing me. Another showed Jackson as a terrified child, cowering in a corner. Mira's image flickered into view, her hands clutching her mother's frail form. "You lied to us," I spat, my voice trembling with fury. "You manipulated us." Alex tilted his head, his smile widening. "Did I lie? Or did I show you the truths you've been running from your whole lives?" He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Clara, you've buried the truth about your brother, telling yourself it wasn't your fault, but deep down, you know the truth." "Stop," I whispered, clenching my fists. "You don't know anything about me." He leaned in, his voice soft but cutting. "I know everything about you. I know the guilt that eats at you. I know the nights you dream of that river, of his face." Michael's voice echoed from one of the mirrors, fragile and thin. "Why didn't you save me?" My legs gave out and I fell to my knees. "I tried," I choked, tears streaming down my face. "I tried to save you." "But you failed," Alex hissed, his voice cold. "And failure is what makes you so delicious." Jackson stumbled forward, clutching his camera. "This isn't real," he muttered, his voice shaky. "You're not real." "Oh, Jackson," Alex sneered, turning his glowing gaze on him. "Hiding behind your gadgets won't save you. You're still that terrified boy, hiding from a monster with your father's face." Jackson collapsed, screaming as the sound of a belt cracking against a wall echoed through the chamber. The mirrors twisted, showing a small boy trembling in the corner of a dingy apartment. "Stop it!" I shouted, forcing myself to my feet. My legs shook, but I wouldn't let him win. "You fed on us long enough, we're leaving." Alex laughed, the sound rumbling through the room like thunder. "Leave? You don't leave the Hallow House. You become part of it." The mirrors lifted from the floor, swirling in a cyclone of glass and memories. The walls stretched and twisted, veins bursting to spill black liquid that oozed across the floor. The house roared, its deep, guttural voice shaking the very foundation. I grabbed Jackson's arm, yanking him up. "We have to move," I screamed. But Alex stood in our way, his glowing eyes fixed on us. "You can't escape your past," he said, his voice reverberating with power, "and you can't escape me." Through the chaos, I saw it. A flickering doorway at the edge of my vision. I didn't know if it was real, but it was our only chance. "Jackson, now!" I shouted, dragging him toward the door. Alex's laughter echoed as the walls collapsed around us. The doorway pulsed with light, and I threw myself through it, pulling Jackson behind me. As the light consumed us, Alex's voice followed, soft and taunting. "You can leave," he said, "but you'll never be free." And then, everything went white. The white light consumed me. For a brief, weightless moment I thought I was dead, untethered from everything. But then, the light fractured, shattering into jagged shards that rained down like glass. My boots hit the ground hard, and the nightmare came rushing back, the Hallow House, alive and seething with fury. I was running. The warped wooden floors groaned beneath my feet, each step reverberating like a warning through the labyrinth of corridors. Jackson was just behind me, his breath ragged and uneven. I could hear the house all around us, walls trembling, veins of crimson light pulsing erratically. the air thick with decay and distant screams that chilled my blood. "Keep going," I yelled, grabbing Jackson's arm and dragging him forward. He was pale, slick with sweat, barely holding on, but we couldn't stop. The house wouldn't let us. From somewhere behind us, Alex's laughter boomed, distorted and omnipresent. "You think you can escape me?" His voice mocked, reverberating through the shifting walls. "You're mine, Clara. All of you." The floor splintered beneath us, great cracks opening to reveal an abyss writhing with shadows. My chest tightened as I leaped over a gap, landing hard on the other side. I turned back just in time to see Jackson teetering on the edge. "Come on," I shouted, reaching for him. He jumped, his hand catching mine just as the ground beneath him crumbled. My muscles screamed as I hauled him up, the weight of both of us threatening to pull me back into the void. Somehow, I managed to get him to solid ground. "Don't stop," I gasped, pulling him forward. The hallway twisted violently, bending and warping in ways that defied reality. Doors appeared on either side of us, each one swinging open to reveal horrors I didn't want to see. My brother's pale, lifeless face stared out from one. Jackson's father loomed in another, belt in hand, his rage palpable. Mira's mother appeared in a third, her hollow eyes burning with accusation. "Don't look," I barked, keeping my eyes fixed ahead. "Just keep moving." Jackson nodded, his face set in determination as he followed me. The house roared around us, its structure collapsing into chaos, walls melting into shadows, floors writhing like they were alive, ceilings dripping with viscous black liquid. Every step felt heavier, the air thick with the house's anger. Then we saw it. At the end of the corridor stood a door, glowing faintly with golden light. Unlike the others, it felt different. The soft glow flickered, as if the house were trying to extinguish it, but it was there, a way out. "There!" I screamed, pointing. "That's our way out." The ground buckled violently, throwing us off balance as the house roared in protest. Shadows surged from the walls, grotesque hands clawing at us. One grazed my shoulder, tearing through my jacket. I shoved Jackson forward, ducking under another swipe. He reached the door first, his hands fumbling desperately with the knob. "It's locked," he cried, his voice breaking with panic. "No, it's not," I yelled, slamming into the door with all my strength. It didn't budge. My heart pounded as I turned to Jackson. "Help me!" Together, we pushed against the door, the hands clawing at us growing more desperate. Their icy touch sent sharp, burning pain through my arms and legs. The door groaned under our combined weight, but it held fast. I screamed in frustration, shoving harder. Finally, the door burst open, flooding the hallway with brilliant light. Without thinking, I grabbed Jackson and threw myself through, the light swallowing us whole. We tumbled onto cold, wet grass. The sharp, clean air hit my lungs like a shock, and I gasped, my chest heaving. I lay there, staring up at the sky, vast and dotted with stars that felt almost unreal after the suffocating darkness of the house. Jackson was beside me, his face blank, his hands trembling as he brought them to his face. His camera was gone, lost in the chaos, and he looked like a ghost of himself. I forced myself to sit up, every muscle aching. Turning, I looked back at the Hallow House. It stood there, silent and unyielding, its dark silhouette as menacing as ever. The windows were dark, and the oppressive energy that had surrounded it seemed to have receded, at least for now. "We made it," I whispered, though the words felt hollow in my mouth. Jackson didn't answer. He just stared at the house, his expression distant and haunted. "Did we?" he muttered. I frowned, turning to him. "What are you talking about? We're out. We're alive." He shook his head slowly, his eyes still fixed on the house. Something's wrong. I can feel it. A knot tightened in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. I had to. Come on, I said, reaching down to help him up. We need to… My words caught in my throat as I noticed something on my palm. A thin, black mark stretched across it, pulsing faintly, glowing with the same sickly light as the veins in the house's walls. I yanked my sleeve down, hiding it before Jackson could see. "Clara?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's go." As we turned away from the house, my heart pounded in my chest. I could still feel its presence lingering in the back of my mind. And then, just faintly, I heard it. Alex's voice, soft and taunting. "You can leave," it whispered, "but you'll never be free." The mark on my hand pulsed again, and I knew the truth. A part of the Hallow House had come with me, and it was waiting.